Menki is an office worker living her boring life on a normal boring day, with superheroes fighting a boring tentacle monster right outside her window. This is a world where humanity has begun expanding their civilization into, and with the help of their pioneering heroes, they have succeeded in developing a new world. However, the people do still need to deal with the occasional tentacle monster here and there, which is where the hero agency comes into play. Normally, the people in this office would need to evacuate since the monster fight is happening next door, but at this point, none of them really care enough to run away, so it's pretty much if I die, then I die. In fact, Menki over there is still hard at work filling out a report, completely ignoring the monster out the window, and her boss loves her work ethic so much that he comes over to give her even more work to do. Meanwhile, Menki's coworkers are all gossiping about a rumor they heard that the company hired a humanoid robot recently, but the boss comes over and tells them to get back to work because he's not paying them to waste company time. Menki happened to overhear the rumor, but she doesn't think it really matters because whether it's a human, a humanoid robot, or even an alien, it doesn't change the fact that she's going to be stuck working at this office for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, right outside, the hero captain, Raymond, is getting ready to finish off the tentacle monster, but as he does so, the villain who was behind the whole attack gets sent flying into Menki's building, and he seems to be holding a bomb, so maybe she should have evacuated after all. Fortunately, before the bomb could go off, one of the heroes jumps in and kicks it out of the building just in time to save everyone inside. He also catches Menki before she could fall, but in the process, a green blob emerges from the necklace he was wearing and flies straight into Menki's head, and let me tell you, that was not a good thing. Menki passes out, so Yasin drags her to a nearby storage closet, and no matter how he looks at this, he's cooked. For now, he decides to get Menki to wake up, so he finds an adrenaline shot and stabs her with it to get the blood pumping again. Menki wakes up and is in shock because she feels like she just died, but Yasin clarifies that she didn't die, it was just a mild case of her heart stopping out of nowhere. That doesn't sound very mild to her, but that's the least of her problems because Yasin explains to her the green blob that flew into her head was actually an alien parasite, and it's worse than the shit going on in The Last of Us. Basically, it eats away at the host's brain until it takes full control of the body, and the only way to keep it at bay is to maintain high mental stimulation at all times. Which basically means, if Menki becomes bored, the parasite is going to eat her brain until she dies. Yasin tries remaining optimistic and tells her that as long as she does exciting stuff, she should be fine for the meantime. But that's a bit of a problem because she works at the most boring job imaginable, so she decides to just accept her fate and lays down to let the parasite do its thing. Yasin begins panicking and tells her not to give up because he's going to do whatever to make sure she stays alive. Menki doesn't understand why a hero like Yasin is willing to go so far to help her, and at first, you'd think he likes her or something, but no, it's just that if Menki dies, it will affect his performance metrics and he'd lose all his hero perks, so he wants to avoid that at all costs. However, listening to Yasin ramble on and on about the hero handbook makes Menki really bored, so the parasite gets a chance to start turning her brain into a smoothie, and all of a sudden, blood starts shooting out of her nose. Several minutes later, Menki wakes up and she is horrified when she takes a look at the room, because there's more blood in here than in one of Jigsaw's traps. She then spots the first aid kit on the floor, and apparently, Yasin performs some impromptu life-saving surgery to make sure Menki wouldn't die, but he warns her to be careful, because if another blood geyser happens, he won't be able to save her again. But then he remembers that it's kind of his fault that she's in this mess to begin with, so he apologizes for his mistake. He tells her that there's still hope for her survival because as long as she avoids being bored, she can live long enough for a cure to be found. But for her, that's a lot easier said than done. Her job is so mind-numbing that she'd have better luck watching paint dry to stay entertained, but Yasin encouraged her to do her best and starts giving a long motivational speech. However, Menki doesn't want to hear it from an exciting superhero like him. She asks Yasin if he'd be willing to swap lives with her if he's so invested in keeping her alive, since becoming a superhero like him is the only way she'd be able to avoid boredom long enough to survive. However, Yasin remains silent, and Menki sighs because she already assumed that Yasin was just bluffing when he said he wanted to help her. She heads for the door so she can return to her boring life. However, before she could leave, Yasin stops her and says he's willing to give her idea a shot. He will help her become a superhero until they can find a cure for the parasite, but even though he genuinely wants to help her, he's not exactly sure how to turn Menki into a hero. Just then, they hear a scream coming from the main room, so they rush out to see what's going on, and to their surprise, they discover that the villain has taken everyone hostage and is holding them at laser gunpoint. But there's still one lady in the back typing away at her computer because she couldn't care less about her life being threatened. Once the villain notices Yasin and Menki, he starts firing at them, forcing Yasin to drag Menki to safety before running out to deal with the grate. He manages to dodge the laser and knock the gun out of the villain's hands, after which he attempts to knock the villain out. But even though the dude looks like this is his first time seeing the sun in years, he actually knows how to run a fade. That said, Yasin is still stronger than him, so to gain the upper hand, he decides to target Menki as a distraction. And it goes exactly as planned because Yasin sacrificed himself and took a laser to the back to protect her. He tells Menki to run away while she still can, but she already decided that she wants to be a hero from now on. So instead, she confronts the villain and tries to find out what he wants. She asks him if he's here for money or revenge, but the villain simply tells her he's there to take out the AI robot that was recently employed by this company. Menki is a little stunned since she wasn't expecting an answer like that, and all the coworkers start murmuring amongst themselves because they'd be more than willing to hand over the robot to save their lives. Yasin tells everyone to be careful because the villain may be trying to trick them into lowering their guard, but no, he really is just a clanker hater. Menki asks if the villain will leave them alone as long as they hand over the robot, and he agrees, but he says he's not sure which one of them is the robot since they look identical to regular humans. Everyone immediately points their fingers at Menki, and they all accuse her of being the robot. After all, they've never seen her show facial expressions while working or join in on the office gossip before, and it definitely couldn't be the lady who has been typing this entire time, so it must be Menki. Menki tries to point out that the typing lady hasn't looked up from her computer this entire time, but the lady just sends a meme in the group chat that says, "I'm not a robot, LOL." And that's good enough for all her coworkers. Menki still insists that she's not the robot, but the villain points his laser at her and threatens to blow her head off unless she can prove that she's not a robot. Yasin gets in front of the villain and swears that Menki is not a robot, and he knows this because the parasite in her head can only attack organic beings, plus she did shoot out a ton of blood earlier. So she's definitely human, but he is still trying to keep that a secret, so he can't provide any proof that Menki is a human. All of a sudden, the boss steps forward and tells everyone that he is certain that Menki isn't the robot, and he knows this because he himself is the android that the company employed. Everyone is so shocked by this development that they don't know what to say, but one of Menki's coworkers thinks the boss is just trying to sacrifice himself in order to save Menki, and she is so moved that she offers herself up as well and claims to be a robot. All the other workers do the same and pile onto the villain, and to be honest, if they can do this, then they could have just jumped him when he first attacked. The boss is caught off guard by the behavior of his employees because he wasn't really trying to be heroic or anything. He really is the robot that the company hired. But by this point, no one is listening to him anymore. Yasin is relieved that the villain has been restrained, so all that's left is to take him into custody and return to base, but all of a sudden, the boss tackles the villain off the edge of the building for absolutely no reason. And normally, this wouldn't really matter, but before the villain falls to his doom, he managed to grab onto Menki's shirt, pulling her down with him, so in turn, Yasin was forced to dive down after her. And he's got that stone-faced expression the entire time because he really doesn't want to be doing this. Mainly because he can't fly, but he does have enhanced strength, so he pushes himself down to the ground first and opens his arms to catch Menki. However, he ended up messing up the timing, so Menki goes splat on the pavement. Two things to note here. It turns out that the boss really was an android, and Menki is still alive because the villain's body broke her fall, but she does have severe internal bleeding right now, so Yasin should probably get her to a hospital soon. Meanwhile, the office ladies see the boss's shattered robot body, and they are devastated to find out that he really was a robot since they were low-key hoping the boss would pipe them down one day because he was hot. As for Menki, it turns out that waiting to be taken to the hospital while most of your bones are broken is pretty boring, so the parasite takes effect again, and she starts shooting blood everywhere again. A few weeks go by and Menki is at home being taken care of by Yasin, and so far, he has provided everything she could ever ask for, whether it be a steak meal, a new video game, or a premium Netflix subscription, but all this work is starting to wear Yasin out. Her injuries have mostly healed, so he asks her when she plans to go back to work, but Menki flatly refuses and tells him she's not going back to work because she doesn't want to. She reminds Yasin that it's his fault that she got infected with a parasite, so it's his responsibility to take care of her until they find a cure. Yasin can't really argue with that, but he has to go do work stuff now, so he tells Menki to take care of herself until he gets back, and the first thing she does once he's gone is call her office to resign from her position. Her entire life, she has been working like an ant in an ant farm, and she doesn't want to keep going like this, so even if she has to mooch off Yasin for the foreseeable future, she's going to take advantage of the opportunity the universe provided her with. However, as she's riding the elevator up to the HR department so she can resign, she notices a window cleaner outside who looks an awful lot like Yasin, and yeah, it really is Yasin. She gets off the elevator on the next floor while Yasin climbs in through one of the windows, and as soon as they meet, they both ask what the other is doing here. Yasin doesn't understand why Menki is at the office because she already told him she's too bored to work today, and Menki doesn't understand why he's here when he told her he had to go to work. Yasin tells her that he doesn't make much money as a superhero, so he had to take a part-time job to cover his expenses, and Menki is shocked to hear this because she thought Yasin was loaded. And if he's really that broke, then she asks him how he managed to pay for her medical and entertainment expenses while she was injured, but that's when Yasin tells her that he has actually been using her savings to pay for all her recent expenses, and hearing that instantly sends a shiver down her spine. She opens her bank app to check her account balance, and just like the number of girls I've talked to this year, it's a big fat zero. She immediately starts having visions of all the bills she has to pay with no money now, and all of a sudden, dying doesn't seem like such a bad option anymore. Just then, the HR guy shows up and asks Menki if she still wants to resign, and at this point, she doesn't really care anymore, so she's about to go through with the resignation, but Yasin stops her because if she doesn't keep her job, she's going to end up starving to death sooner or later, especially now that she has no savings. This situation looks odd, but the HR guy doesn't really care what Menki has going on, so he just asks her if she plans to quit or not. Yasin eventually convinces her to keep her job, so she's going to have to keep working, but she can already feel the boredom creeping up on her. Yasin tells her he can't provide her with money, but he's willing to do anything to keep her from feeling bored, and Menki decides to take him up on that offer. So she asks him to at least let her experience what it's like to live the life of a superhero for a day. Yasin agrees as long as it will get her to go back to work, so he tells her to get on his back as he jumps off the roof. At first, Menki is really enjoying the feeling of flying, but then she remembers that Yasin doesn't actually fly, and jumping across rooftops is a lot less comfortable than she imagined it to be. Furthermore, she's starting to realize that Yasin's life may actually be worse than hers because he has to work a bunch of part-time jobs, and this isn't fun at all, especially the toilet clog job. By lunchtime, Menki is fed up and asks why Yasin is working at jobs like this, even though he has superpowers, but he tells her that his next job requires him to use his superpower, so she should find it a little more interesting. Menki keeps her hopes up, but it turns out that the job Yasin was talking about was just construction, and by the end of the day, they are both exhausted, but the only thing Menki managed to learn about Yasin is that he's broker than she is. Yasin says he's glad she understands his situation now, and on that note, he says he'd like to move into her apartment since he will be taking care of her anyway, and he also doesn't want to have to pay rent anymore. Before Menki even gets a chance to respond, Yasin has already moved all his stuff in, and a few minutes later, he's ready to go to sleep on the couch, but Menki isn't satisfied. She thinks there's no way a superhero could really live like this, but Yasin tells her she's overestimating how lucrative hero work really is, so he needs to do what he can to make ends meet. If that's the case, then Menki asks why all the heroes on TV seem so rich, but Yasin explains that those guys are the exception, and that not all heroes get to be rich and famous like them. Menki now realizes that Yasin's life is a lot harder than she thought, which makes her feel bad about trying to take advantage of him, so she agrees to let him move in and says goodnight before going to bed. However, later that night, Yasin sneaks into her room with a briefcase and some defibrillators because the brain parasite is still a major concern, even when Menki is asleep, so he stands over her the entire night, and whenever she looks like she's having a boring dream, he shocks her head to stimulate her brain. By morning, Menki wakes up, and she notices that she feels unusually tired for some reason, but that's nothing compared to Yasin, because he looks like he's been up all night. Menki isn't sure what happened to Yasin, but she thanks him for preparing breakfast for her, and afterwards, she gets dressed for work. Yasin is a bit surprised since he thought she would want to join his daily life again today, but compared to what Yasin goes through, her office job is much easier, so she says she will do her best to avoid getting bored at work. Yasin is relieved to hear that Menki is willing to go back to work, but he's still got a few things he needs to take care of, so as soon as she's gone, he jumps off the balcony. Later that day, he heads to Hero HQ to search the database for any known cures for the parasite, but unfortunately, he doesn't have high enough security clearance for that information, so it's a dead end. The only other option he has now is to go meet his boss to ask what he should do. Meanwhile, Menki's back at her desk in the office, and she's doing her best to keep her mind entertained, but she can't keep herself from thinking, damn, this shit is boring. Back to Yasin, he finally gets to meet with his boss, but the second he asks what would happen if a civilian ended up dying as a result of a recent hero mission, his boss loses it. He starts yelling and firing off lasers as he demands to know which stupid hero killed his civilian. But Yasin quickly backpedals and says he was only asking hypothetically because there's no way he'd ever be reckless enough to put a civilian's life at risk. Now, he knows he can't just come clean about the whole situation, but if he's going to keep Menki's condition a secret and keep her alive long enough to find a cure, then he will need a lot more money. That's why he decides to take on some high-level hero missions to earn some quick cash, but the jobs here seem pretty difficult. Just then, one of Yasin's buddies, Gray, comes over and finds him staring at a 5-star mission, which is surprising to him because he knows Yasin usually only handles 2 or 3 stars at most, so he wonders why he is suddenly taking such risks. Yasin explains that he needs extra money because he needs to take care of a girl, and as soon as he hears this, Gray assumes that Yasin must have gotten himself a girlfriend, but Yasin tells him it's a long story. Gray offers to assist him with the 5-star mission since he looks like he could use the help. However, the mission ends in horrible failure, and by the end of the day, Yasin is badly injured and covered in monster blood, so Gray helps him get home. However, as they approach the door, Gray realizes that this place belongs to a civilian, and he assumes it must be the new girlfriend that Yasin doesn't want to tell him about, so he's excited to see what she looks like. However, as he opens the door, what he sees is pretty disappointing. He finds Menki sprawled over the couch, stuffing her face with chips and playing video games. After seeing Yasin in his injured state, she casually tells him to lie on the floor if he needs to rest because she doesn't want him staining her couch with alien blood. But this rubs Gray the wrong way because Yasin was out there taking on dangerous missions so he could provide for Menki, yet she doesn't seem grateful at all. He has no idea about the Parasite, or why Yasin is so committed to taking care of Menki, so he thinks this must be an abusive relationship and warns Yasin to back out before it's too late. All of a sudden, Menki gets up, and for a second, Gray thinks she had a change of heart and wants to help Yasin after all, but then she casually steps over Yasin's head and walks into her bedroom. He starts yelling that she's heartless, but all the noise is giving Yasin a headache, so he asks Gray to go home for now, and he will explain everything the next time they meet. Yasin then collapses next to the door, but to his surprise, a moment later, Menki returns with a first aid box, so she really does intend to help him. She starts patching him up as best she can, but his injuries are more than she's prepared to handle, so she tells Yasin that he should really go to a hospital soon. However, Yasin tells her that he has a healing factor, so as long as she can stop the bleeding, he will be fine after a good night's sleep. After saying that, he promptly passes out, so Menki finishes cleaning him and patching up his wounds. She can't say she's happy about being infected with a parasite, but her life has become a lot more exciting since she met Yasin, and for better or worse, she thinks that's a good thing. Though the parasite thing does really suck, she's starting to suffer symptoms again, so she heads to the bathroom to deal with the nosebleed. A little while later, Yasin regains consciousness and finds Menki in the bathroom, so he hands her a towel and apologizes again for the mess he caused. Menki tells him she has already decided to stay at her job, so he doesn't need to keep taking dangerous jobs to provide for her, and she doesn't really blame him for what happened since she knows it was an accident, so they'll just have to handle the parasite together until they can get rid of it. Just then, Yasin gets a message on his phone, and it gives him a great idea, so he grabs Menki and tells her he just found a good way to alleviate her boredom. He picks her up and jumps out the window so he can take Menki to an active battle zone where some top-tier heroes are currently fighting an alien. And Menki is loving it because this is the kind of superhero excitement she was hoping for. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.